Okay, now I think I'm going live. Let's see. This is a 4-part Netflix documentary. See, it's live now. Okay. Now I'm going to put my iPad in the stand. Okay. I will exit out of YouTube. I will go to Zentevi. Okay, I've actually done Ted Bundy falling for a killer, but now I'm gonna do Ted Bundy, the Ted Bundy tapes. See, it's season 1, like, there's 4 episodes to it, like Handsome Devil, One of Us, Not My Turn to Watch 'Em, Burn Bundy, Burn. I think I'll do Burn Bundy, Burn. Gotta wait for it to load up.
Listen up, please. Hold it down. Hold it down a minute.
If you have a tape or a package that's ready to feed, bring it to the feed.
Listen up, please. Hold it down. Hold it down a minute.
If you have a tape or a package that's ready to feed, bring it to the feed point between 11 and 11:30 and 12 and 12:30. Keep your pieces short so that we can all get on the air.
3, 2, 1.
This is Larry Warren reporting live from Ted Bundy's double murder trial.
He is charged with killing 2 female students at Florida State University.
He is also being sought for questioning in 36 slangs.
Those whose bodies have been found were sexually molested and severely beaten.
The lurid nature of the case, the depravity of the violence, and the personality of Ted Bundy combined to make this something that the media could not ignore.
As a result of a Florida State Supreme Court ruling, the Bundy trial would be open to TV cameras, no matter what the prosecution or the defense had to say.
This is the first time a trial had ever been covered by TV like this.
Ready to go.
It was tremendously exciting. Lights on, cameras rolling.
Smile, Ted.
Technologically, it was another era. Electronic news gathering was just in its infancy.
Is anybody using a walkie-talkie on this floor? Shut it down. You're breaking up the feed.
We had the media from all 50 states and 9 foreign countries in big numbers. It was an unprecedented filming of a trial of this nature.
3, 2, 1. Following is split.
Take 10.
4, 3.
2, 1.
Joe Berlinger directed this documentary series, and he also directed the Ted Bundy movie that was on Netflix. Extremely wicked, shockingly evil, and vile.
The Circuit Court, Second Judicial Circuit of the State of Florida in Mulligan County is now in session. The Honorable Edwin C. Cowley presiding. Be seated.
We're conducting a public business, gentlemen, and we're going to conduct it in sunshine, as we've said in Florida.
Nobody had ever handled a case like this before the cameras, and certainly not before the virtual nation watching.
What's all these cameras doing on the fourth floor? What's these cameras doing on the fourth floor? I gotta go. Get away from here. Get.
I was a young lawyer at the time. It was baptism by fire, if you would. But quite frankly, from my perspective, I had to treat it like it was just another case.
I was the public defender appointed to represent Ted Bundy. We didn't have any choice about the case. Mr. Bundy didn't have any money. When I first met Bundy, I had an opportunity to speak with him in a very small visiting room and was not altogether comfortable being at close quarters with him. It was a little awkward and maybe a little frightening.
I've got a case, I've got facts. I've got to deal with those facts, and I've got to come up with a way to convince a jury that Theodore Bundy committed these crimes.
I felt the forensic evidence against Bundy was really pretty sketchy. The problem with Ted Bundy was he was not a typical defendant because he was so infamous. The media had flooded the whole state of Florida with all of this prejudicial publicity about what Ted Bundy had done. All the information goes a long way to destroying whatever public perception or belief in innocent until proven guilty. So my strategy was low-key, low profile, have Ted Bundy do as little as possible. I may have described it as just sit quietly and look innocent.
Obviously, there was a great deal of pressure on the prosecution, and nobody knew for sure that we were going to be able to get a conviction ultimately in trial. And the one thing that we were absolutely positive of is that we did not want Mr. Bundy back on the streets again.
The most important thing was to save his life. I wanted to discuss the possibility of trying to negotiate a plea bargain that would result in him being spared the death penalty. So I went and talked to him.
Came into my cell and said, I don't like the way this prosecution against you shaking up. Sincerest belief there was no way I'd be found not guilty. They made a proposal. He said an offer was made for you to make a plea in exchange for a life sentence. And it bothered me because I felt like he was conceding that I was guilty and all I was there for was to save my life.
I said, are you willing to have us negotiate? He said, yes, I can do a plea. I was surprised when he said yes.
We decided that it would be best if we could resolve this case to have him enter a guilty plea that would ultimately result in Mr. Bundy going to prison for the rest of his life.
That was a lot of pressure. A lot of pressure. I don't think I've been under so much pressure. I recall a lot of pressure to take it. I mean, I'd be the last one to say I want the death penalty. I don't. Yeah. I mean, I was awake nights worrying that this was going to happen.
Ted Bundy was concerned about losing his life. And it got out, of course, that there may have been a deal struck. It went like wildfire.
The courtroom was full of people, even though our agreement with the state was, let's don't have a big show, as few people as possible, but it was packed.
A room full of law enforcement officers and Casares and the head of the state patrol sitting right up in front of God and everybody, just looking like cats just followed the canary.
Well, we went into court that morning thinking Mr. Bundy was going to enter a plea. We got there, and the first thing that happened was Mr. Bundy stood up and started making a speech.
It's my position that my counsel, 1, believe that I am guilty, 2, that they have told me they see no way of presenting an effective defense, and in no uncertain terms they have told me that, and 3, that they see no way of avoiding conviction. Your Honor, if that does not raise itself to the level of ineffectiveness of counsel, I don't know what does.
He sabotaged the plea and turned it down. I mean, it was demoralizing to me.
I skewered Mike. Yeah. Pretty rigorously. And I had no time ever to plead guilty.
You got a sense of drama, Ted.
No way could I stand up in front of a jury and try to convince them that he was not guilty when he said I had told him I believed he was guilty. I mean, there was no credibility there at all.
I talked to Mr. Minerva after court that day, and I just looked him in the face and I said, Bundy just gave up the deal of a lifetime.
I finally filed a motion to withdraw, but the judge would not let us out.
Judge Cowart, not in the mood for more delays, decided Minerva should stay.
I'm going to deny the motion to substitute counsel, and I'm likewise going to deny the motion to withdraw.
So I stayed involved in a limited way in the role of advisory counsel. And because Bundy was so insistent on taking part in the case, the judge allowed him to be co-counsel, which is a fiction because he wasn't a lawyer.
He always knew best. I think he believed he knew better than any other lawyer. And after he rejected the plea bargain, we got the idea that he was not going to be a person to take these charges sitting down.
You're going to try for another attorney? You're going to represent yourself, or you're going to get another attorney?
I'm staying with the man I know best right now, and that's me.
The state of Florida is going to officially begin testing its case against Theodore Robert Bundy.
It was pre-trial publicity which brought the Bundy trial from Tallahassee to Miami. Too many people were familiar with the details of the Bundy case.
Bundy, who's accused of murdering 2 Florida State University co-eds, is acting as his own lawyer.
I was really in control of myself. I really felt good. There was just no problem.
See the
No
TV.
one proved Ted Bundy.
Maybe I gotta start this documentary over.
My rise, please. Hear ye, hear ye, hear ye. This honorable circuit.
No wonder it's on.
Of Florida in Bundy County is now open. The Honorable Judge Cowart presiding. Please be seated. Court will come to order.
I'm going to start this documentary over again because you probably just heard what they were saying in it, but you didn't see it, and it was my fault because I had it on back camera instead of front camera. So that was my fault. Well, come on. I can't get it to play. It's... Okay, go to favorites. Go to TV shows. Go to the Ted Bundy tapes. Go to Burn, Bundy, Burn. It just doesn't want to load up. I don't know why. I'm trying to get it to play again. It was playing fine earlier. I don't know why it's not loading up. Well, maybe I should try another one. Maybe I should try episode 2, One of Us. Because episode number 4 just doesn't want to play. It was playing fine, and then when I switched the direction of the camera, it stopped playing, and then I couldn't get it to play again. I don't know why. I don't know why it's not playing now. I give up on this app. It just does not want to play. I think I'm going to install Netflix. Because I know it will play on Netflix. It just doesn't want to play on the app I installed. I tried to get it to play, it just wouldn't play. You know what? I think I'm gonna move this live stream to my bedroom. Because it just is moving way too slow.
In home, NBC News button 7. Launching Netflix. On the profile selection screen. Who's watching Netflix? And playing. 4 of 5 buttons.
Okay. Now. I got Netflix on.
I've met the person on the in the My List row. Resume as 1F4. Burn. Playing. 1 hour. Playing. 1 hour 40.
Volume 41.
Press OK to pause.
Volume 48.
If you have a tank or a package that's ready to feed, bring it to the feed point between 11
This is Larry Warren reporting live from Ted Bundy's double murder trial.
He is charged with killing 2 female students at Florida State University.
He is also being sought for questioning in 36 slangs. Those whose bodies have been found were sexually molested and severely beaten.
The lurid nature of the case, the depravity of the violence, and the personality of Ted Bundy combined to make this something that the media could not ignore.
As a result of a Florida State Supreme Court ruling, the Bundy trial would be open to TV cameras, no matter what the prosecution or the defense had to say.
This is the first time a trial had ever been covered by TV like this.
Ready to go.
It was tremendously exciting. Lights on, cameras rolling.
Smile, Ted.
Technologically, it was another era. Electronic news gathering was just in its infancy.
Is anybody using a walkie-talkie on this floor? Shut it down. You're breaking up the feed.
We had the media from all 50 states and 9 foreign countries in big numbers. It was an unprecedented filming of a trial of this nature.
3, 2, 1. Following exit. Take care.
4, 3,
2, 1.
Skip control.
Joe Berlinger is the director of this 4-episode documentary, but Joe Berlinger also directed the Netflix movie about Ted Bundy, starring Zac Efron, called Extremely Wicked, Shockingly Evil, and Vile.
In Mulligan County is now in session. The Honorable Edward C. Cowell presiding. Be seated.
We're conducting a public business, gentlemen, and we're going to conduct it in sunshine, as we've said in Florida.
Nobody had ever handled a case like this before the cameras, and certainly not before the virtual nation watching.
What's all these cameras doing on the 4th floor? What's these cameras doing on the 4th floor? I got it on film. Get away from here. Get.
I was a young lawyer at the time. It was baptism by fire, if you would. But quite frankly, from my perspective, I had to treat it like it was just another case.
I was the public defender appointed to represent Ted Bundy. We didn't have any choice about the case. Mr. Bundy didn't have any money. When I first met Bundy, I had an opportunity to speak with him in a very small visiting room and was not altogether comfortable being at close quarters with him. It was a little awkward and maybe a little frightening.
I've got a case, I've got facts. I've got to deal with those facts, and I've got to come up with a way to convince a jury that Theodore Bundy committed these crimes.
I felt the forensic evidence against Bundy was really pretty sketchy. The problem with Ted Bundy was he was not a typical defendant because he was so infamous. The media had flooded the whole state of Florida with all of this prejudicial publicity about what Ted Bundy had done. All the information goes a long way to destroying whatever public perception or belief in innocent until proven guilty. So my strategy was low-key, low-profile, have Ted Bundy do as little as possible. I may have described it as just sit quietly and look innocent.
Obviously, there was a great deal of pressure on the prosecution, and nobody knew for sure that we were going to be able to get a conviction ultimately in trial. And the one thing that we were absolutely positive of is that we did not want Mr. Bundy back on the streets again.
The most important thing was to save his life. I wanted to discuss the possibility of trying to negotiate a plea bargain that would result in him being spared the death penalty. So I went and talked to him.
Came into my cell, he said, "Ted, I don't like the way this prosecution against you shaping up. Sincerest belief there was no way I'd be found not guilty." Then he made the proposal. He said an offer was made for you to make a plea in exchange for a life sentence. And it bothered me because I felt like he was conceding that I was guilty and all I was there for was to save my life.
I said, "Are you willing to have us negotiate?" He said, "Yes, I can do a plea." I was surprised when he said yes.
We decided that it would be best if we could resolve this case to have him enter a guilty plea that would ultimately result in Mr. Bundy going to prison for the rest of his life.
I was under a lot of pressure. A lot of pressure. I don't think I've been under so much pressure I can recall. A lot of pressure to take. I mean, I'd be the last one to say I want the death penalty. I don't. Yeah. I mean, I would wait nights worrying that this was going to happen to me.
Ted Bundy was concerned about losing his life, and it got out, of course, that there may have been a deal struck. It went like wildfire.
The courtroom was full of people, even though our agreement with the state was, let's don't have a big show, as few people as possible, but it was packed.
A room full of law enforcement officers and Casares and the head of the state patrol sitting right up in front of God and everybody, just looking like cats to just follow the canary.
Well, we went into court that morning thinking Mr. Bundy was going to enter a plea. We got there, and the first thing that happened was Mr. Bundy stood up and started making a speech.
It's my position that my counsel, 1, believe that I am guilty, 2, that they have told me they see no way of presenting an effective defense, and in no uncertain terms they have told me that, and 3, that they see no way of avoiding conviction. Your Honor, if that does not raise itself to the level of ineffectiveness of counsel, I don't know what does.
He sabotaged the plea and turned it down. I mean, it was demoralizing to me.
Skewered Mike.
Yeah.
Pretty rigorously. And I had no time ever until I plead guilty.
You got a sense of drama, Ted.
No way could I stand up in front of a jury and try to convince them that he was not guilty when he said I had told him I believed he was guilty. I mean, there was no credibility there at all.
I talked to Mr. Minerva after court that day, and I just looked him in the face and I said, Bundy just gave up the deal of a lifetime.
I finally filed a motion to withdraw, but the judge would not let us out.
Judge Cowart, not in the mood for more delays, decided Minerva should stay.
I'm going to deny the motion to substitute counsel, and I'm likewise going to deny the motion to withdraw.
So I stayed involved in a limited way in the role of advisory counsel. And because Bundy was so insistent on taking part in the case, the judge allowed him to be co-counsel, which is a fiction because he wasn't a lawyer.
He always knew best. I think he believed he knew better than any other lawyer. And after he rejected the plea bargain, we got the idea that he was not going to be a person to take these charges sitting down.
You're going to try for another attorney? You're going to represent yourself, or you're going to get another attorney?
I'm staying with the man I know best right now, and that's me.
The state of Florida is going to officially begin testing its case against Theodore Robert Bundy.
It was pre-trial publicity which brought the Bundy trial from Tallahassee to Miami. Too many people were familiar with the details of the Bundy case.
Bundy, who's accused of murdering 2 Florida State University co-eds, is acting as his own lawyer.
I was really in control of myself. I really felt good There was just no problem. New and improved Ted Bundy.
Why don't you get started, Florida? All rise, please. Hear ye, hear ye, hear ye. This Honorable Circuit Court of the 11th Judicial Circuit of Florida and for Dade County is now open. The Honorable Judge Howard presiding. Please be seated. Court will come to order.
Today, the Bundy trial has begun, and there's a new member on the defense team, Attorney Margaret Good.
After the failed plea, Mike Minerva is still head lawyer on the case. However, he decided not to go to Miami. And Mike Minerva had requested me to join the defense team. I was just a run-of-the-mill, idealistic young criminal defense lawyer. When asked to do a very difficult job, said, yes, I'll do it. We took the position that Ted was incompetent. He didn't understand the evidence against him. It's a basic principle of our law that you don't try a person when they are incompetent.
I thought Bundy was very competent, very capable, and we did have a competency hearing.
And the judge, remarkably, ruled that he is competent.
Unlike most murder trials, this one will feature the defendant helping 4 public defenders in cross-examining witnesses.
Judge Coward ruled that not only was Ted competent to stand trial, but that he was in charge of the defense. And it was just a very difficult situation because there were times when he was very erratic, impulsive, and strange.
Specifically, what do you seek, Mr. Bundy? Well, specifically, Your Honor, I'm seeking daily outdoor exercise.
You know, we couldn't control his impulses and his irrationality any more than he could control it. And it was annoying, and it was different, and we had no training in how to handle it.
Earlier today, Bundy directly asked the judge for more exercise, more access to the jail's law library, more conference periods, and the use of a typewriter.
He was always deferring and deflecting to draw the attention away from the case.
One of my favorite motions that he filed was a motion for a change of menu, arguing that he had eaten the same grilled cheese sandwich every day for the last 5 or 6 days, and he just really needed something else.
This morning, he said his living conditions at the jail prevent him from helping his attorneys.
The light source is totally matched with the refi. The only way one can read in that cell is to hold the document outside the bars and to read the document through the available light that filters from the light source outside the cell.
During his noon recess, Judge Coward visited Bundy's cell and said the lighting was bad. He told jailers, I'd hate to have to read in it myself. He then ruled that Bundy should be transferred to this nearby conference room.
He thought he was clever enough and smart enough and cunning enough to avoid conviction. He had, I guess, just enough knowledge of the law to know what to do, but not enough to keep him out of trouble.
Come over here, please, sir. Step up to the witness box and raise your right hand.
Officer Ray Crew was one of the first officers that arrived at the Omega House that morning. I put him on the witness stand to kind of set the scene, if you would.
I began a room by room search to see if there were any other victims or potential witnesses. And I started at the northwest corner of the north hallway.
Because I had crime scene people still coming, I had not gone into detail.
No further questions. Mr. Bundy?
Out of the clear blue sky, for some reason, Mr. Bundy decided that he was going to cross-examine that witness about what the crime scene looked like at the Omega House.
You testified here this morning that you recall arriving at the Omega House approximately 3:26 a.m.
Yes, sir.
Then, to the best of your recollection, step by step, if you can, officer, what did you do next?
Step by step, I went in from 4, and observed a young lady lying on the right-hand side, basically face down with the sheet pulled up. Initially, I observed a puncture wound through the nipple in the right breast. When the sheet was pulled off of her and she was moved to the floor, I observed a bloody mark on her right buttocks.
I've never seen anything like that before in my career. You would never, if you were a lawyer, want your client to cross-examine a crime scene witness he was bringing out the gore that he had left there.
Touch Miss Bowman?
No, sir, I didn't touch her body. I lifted the covers back so that I could observe.
And can you describe what you saw when you lifted up the covers? As much detail as you can recall. If you need to use your report, please feel free to do so.
She was lying basically face down. There was a considerable amount of blood around her head. There was what appeared to be a nylon stocking netted around her neck. Her head was bloated, discolored. When her eyelid was raised, her eyes appeared a little glassy.
Asking him to relate in excruciating detail what you saw when you first got there, over and over again, it could be perceived that he had encountered the crime scene before and relished in what it looked like and wanted it repeated, is how it could be interpreted.
Can you describe the exact position, as best you can recall, of Miss Levy's body as you saw it when you first entered the room?
Objection to repetition. He's previously described it.
Recall the position of her arms. If we recognize that the person of this type could receive gratification in the act of killing itself, it's reasonable to assume that at a later point he might dwell on that because it fits into it might fit into the fantasy structure.
It was just very unsettling, did not seem to be in Ted's best interest. And it put us, the defense attorneys, in a particularly difficult situation.
There are reports of unrest in the defense camp as the lawyers quarrel among themselves on who should do key cross-examinations.
The jury is unaware of the squabbles amongst the defense team, and these conflicts have apparently not affected the way the defendant views his chances of acquittal.
I did not have any strong forensics on this case, but we had a positive identification of Mr. Bundy as the one that committed the crimes. Anita Neary was, I thought, one of the best witnesses that we had.
Do you recall the man that you saw at the door of Kyle Miller's house on the morning of January 15, 1978?
Yes, I do.
Could you describe the man that you saw at the door?
Yes, he had a very prominent nose, a straight bridge that almost came to a point, not quite, very thin lips, clean shaven. I commented earlier, nice looking almost, if you want.
And is that man in the courtroom today?
Yes, he is.
Would you point him out for us, please?
I thought that she gave very compelling testimony. And one of the most important pieces of evidence in my mind was she sat down with an artist and she described the profile view of the man. You could hold that sketch up next to Mr. Bundy and it is a spitting image of Mr. Bundy.
The sketch was not very detailed. It was almost like a stick figure. It didn't amount to conclusive proof.
Did you ever have any direct eye-to-eye contact with the man?
No.
Did you see the man's facial expression?
No.
Did you see the man's eyes?
No.
Did you see the man's eyebrows?
I can't remember them now.
Did you see the man's ears?
No.
Did you see the man's hair?
No. I had a few seconds to observe the entire man.
Bob Haggard did an excellent job on cross-examination. Her testimony was not very certain, and right after, Robert Haggard did that very, very excellent cross-examination, destroying the state's case. Ted got up in open court and tried to fire Haggard as his attorney.
As attempts by me to participate in the courtroom have met with vigorous opposition on the part of my counsel. This is more, we're speaking more to a problem that attorneys have in giving up power. Maybe we're dealing with a problem of professional psychology, where attorneys are so jealous of the
power they exercise in the courtroom. They're afraid to share it with the defendant.
Then defense attorney Robert Haggard, without explanation, asked to be excused and walked out of court.
And number 3.
Ted was not a well person. If ever there was a decision to be made that would benefit the defense or benefit the state, Ted would always choose the one that benefited the state.
My feeling is that lawyers should control the defense of the case by virtue of their experience.
We were seeing here a real crime drama. It was just sordid, lurid, sensational enough that I think people wanted to watch it replayed every day during the trial.
Each day, the courtroom is filled with spectators drawn by a fascination with Theodore Bundy himself or by the gruesome details of the crimes. What is unusual to see is that many of the onlookers are women, young women.
Women would slip notes to me and ask me to give them to Ted. You know, I would say, no, I can't do that.
Are you a little scared when you look at him?
Yes, it scares me to be in the same room with him, but I know there's other people in there.
I'm not afraid of him. He just doesn't look like the type to kill somebody. Every time he turns around, I kind of get that feeling, oh no, you know, gonna get me next. You know?
But yet you're fascinated by him.
Very, very.
Why do you do it?
I don't know.
One woman who has been at the trial for the past 4 days and who frequently confers with Bundy has another impression entirely. Carol Boone believes Bundy is completely innocent. Some have called her his girlfriend. She prefers to be known as just a close personal friend.
Carol was a friend of his from Washington, and Carol had reappeared in his life to actually act as his champion because she felt that he was telling the truth and that he was being railroaded. She was Ted's advocate. That was her identity. She felt maternal towards him to some extent. And she was adamant that her bunny, as she called him, was wholly innocent.
Let me put it this way. I don't think that Ted belongs in jail. The things in Florida don't concern me any more than the things out west do. And those are the things...
You think these are trumped up charges?
I don't think they had reason to charge Ted Bundy with murder in either Leon County or Columbia County.
Boone says she has twice been allowed to visit Bundy in jail since he was brought to Miami 6 days ago. She describes him as nervous, but cautiously hopeful.
Are there any dates set on any other trials, even with acquittal?
Yes. Well, you know, if I was a football coach, I'd say, you know, when you're first game of the season, you don't start looking for the Super Bowl.
I believe he thought he was going to get away with this. But the piece of evidence that was going to be the centerpiece of the prosecution that would be used for the first time in a court setting was the bite marks. There was a very large, very imprinted double bite mark. The person bit, withdrew, and bit again as hard as the person could.
And the question became whether or not there was any way that a suspect could be identified from that bite mark.
Could you please state your name for the record?
My name is Richard Souveron.
What is that?
This is a stone cast of Mr. Bundy's upper teeth.
State's star witness Dr. Richard Souveron, a Miami forensic odontologist, showed the court the peculiarities of Bundy's teeth. Slightly crooked upper front teeth with distinct incisors and chip marks.
Whoever made this mark in the skin, in the flesh, had crooked teeth.
I believe it was the canine teeth that were very distinct, that really were different.
It was obvious that the jury was affected by the big show put on by the prosecution. But we really concentrated hard on trying to limit the scope of that testimony.
Mike did come down to Miami and handled the bite mark evidence. It was the first time that kind of tool mark evidence had been used in a criminal case. And he was the expert, legally speaking, on that
bite mark evidence is not like DNA. It's now pretty much considered junk science.
This idea that you could positively identify someone from the bruise pattern they would leave on human flesh, it was just gross speculation, but it didn't change what happened.
Can you tell us within a reasonable degree of dental certainty if those teeth made the marks on those photographs?
Yes, sir.
And what is that opinion, sir?
They made the marks.
I mean, I felt the tide turn right there. They may have been somewhat ambivalent up to in the state's case, up until the point where the state's witnesses testified, and then our failure to effectively refute that, I think, was very significant to the jury. I was feeling embittered and persecuted. I couldn't endure this humiliation. I had to make a statement.
The jurors were out of the courtroom this morning when Judge Edward Cowart received word from one of Theodore Bundy's guards of an incident at the Dade County Jail involving the defendant last night, which also explained his absence from the court at the start of this morning's session.
Go ahead.
This morning, I went to Mr. Bundy's cell to awaken him so he could get dressed to come to court. I could not get him to get up. I noticed that the lock had been jammed with what appeared to be toilet paper.
Was this from the inside the cell or
on the outside, Judge?
He had wet toilet paper and stuffed it in the lock and kept it from locking. He was different, and he was smart, and he was a challenge to the best.
Court will find him in contempt of this court for failing to be here at this time, and I want to instruct counsel to go talk to Mr. Bundy, and it's now 10 minutes after 9. This court will reconvene at 9:30, and we'll continue whether he's here or not.
At that point in time, things were going good for the prosecution, so it was real obvious he was trying to do something to change that.
Just past 9:30 this morning, Theodore Bundy entered the court for Judge Cowart.
Mr. Bundy?
Yes, sir.
The court wants to talk to you. Come up to the bar. Happened. What happened?
Where? Amy in the jail?
The court was supposed to start at 9 o'clock. I want to tell you something, young man, and I want to tell you clearly and unequivocally so you understand. This court is not going to follow your schedule. This court is going to set the time when we convene and when we do not convene. The court has already found you in contempt of this court. Be forewarned, I'm not tolerating any more of it. Is there any question in your mind?
Perhaps the court can tell me how I can hold the jail in contempt and the...
You can quit breaking lights and stuffing toilet paper in a lock. That's how you can not hold them in contempt.
What I'm saying to you, Your Honor, is I'm laboring under conditions which are causing me stress that this court is not aware of. The conditions imposed upon me by the Dade County Jail constitute harassment. It is an attempt by the system, I think, to coerce me and to wear me down. Since I have been in Dade County, I've been allowed to...
Don't shake your finger at me, young man. Don't shake your finger at me, young man.
Of 1.5 hours.
That's fine. You can shake it at Mr. Haggard.
He probably deserves it better than you. He occasionally shakes his finger at me. This railroad train may be running, Your Honor, but if I want to get off, I'll get off if I need to demonstrate to the court that there are things happening outside this courtroom. They're influencing and affecting me. There comes a time when I just have to say, whoa.
If you say whoa, I'm going to be using spurs and overcome that whoa.
Giddy up.
You bet. And this court is going to proceed on schedule. Bless your heart. I just hope you stay with us. And if you don't, we'll miss you. All right?
I'm not going to try to please people. I hold my head high. I believe in myself. Dealing from that on out, I know exactly what's what. And Lord knows I'm the
first and foremost person who has the personal and intimate knowledge that it couldn't be me, that it's not me, that I'm innocent. And I'll lay my money on me.
Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, counsel will now be making their closing arguments to you, or their final arguments.
The evidence in this case presents many reasonable doubts. It's a sad day for our system of justice. It can put a man's life on the line because they say he has crooked teeth. How tragic it would be if a man's life could be taken from him because 12 people thought that he was probably guilty, but they were not sure.
You hope the jury would find a reasonable doubt and find that this evidence was insufficient and find him not guilty of first-degree murder. But you never know what a jury's going to do.
This man premeditated this murder. He knew what he was going to do before he did it. He thinks he is smart enough to get away with any crime.
Give him the same amount of mercy that he gave Lisa Levy and Margaret Bowman, which was absolutely none.
Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, you may retire now to consider your verdict.
This case went to the jury shortly before jury deliberate until midnight. It was exactly 3 hours ago that Judge Edward Cowart gave the case to the jury. They are now deliberating behind closed doors inside the jury room, examining more than 100 exhibits.
Are you confident that he will be acquitted here?
I hope he will be acquitted. I can't say I'm confident.
We interrupt this program to bring you a special report live from the Justice Building in Miami, Florida. Deliberating for 6.5 hours, the jury returned to the courtroom just past 9:30 Eastern Time Tuesday night to announce its decision.
This is the verdict, Madam Clerk.
The Circuit Court of the Second Judicial Circuit in Napoleon County, Florida, case number 78670. The state of Florida versus Theodore Robert Bundy, verdict. We, the jury at Miami-Dade County, Florida, this 24th day of July, A.D. 1979, find the defendant, Theodore Robert Bundy, as to count 2 of the indictment, murder in the first degree upon one Margaret Bowman, guilty as charged. As to count 3 of the indictment, murder in the first degree upon one Lisa Levy, guilty as charged, so say we all without be troubled fallen.
They refuse to perceive me as being anything that approaches being normal. They don't understand me. They don't really understand me. They're missing, a very important point, I guess.
When the verdict came in, Ted, his demeanor, his expression was completely different than how he had been throughout the trial. One of intense surprise, which really just confirmed to me that he did not have a rational understanding of the proceedings or what was happening to him or what was about to happen to him.
Ted Bundy is found guilty of all 7 counts of the indictment. That includes 3 charges of attempted murder and 2 counts of first-degree murder, a crime that is a capital offense in the state of Florida, a crime for which he can be sent to the electric chair.
What's your reaction?
We're very satisfied with what verdict we did get in this case. We couldn't have expected it to be any better than it was.
It had been a long, hard investigation, long, hard trial. We knew that a lot of people were pulling for us to win that case, and it was a tremendous relief to know that we did.
Needless to say, I think the jury is totally wrong. They didn't take enough time. How could you consider all those momentous decisions in 6 hours? It's just impossible. It's wrong. We'll appeal it. It's just... What else can I say? The family will be devastated by this, but we stick behind him because we know he's not guilty, as do all his friends. That's it.
2:20 this afternoon, the case was handed to the jurors with a decision before them of whether to sentence convicted murderer Theodore Bundy to life imprisonment or death. But it was the defendant's mother, Louise Bundy, who made the most impassioned plea for her son's life.
My Christian upbringing tells me that to take another's life under any circumstances is wrong. And I don't believe the state of Florida is above the laws of God. Ted can be very useful in many ways to many people. Living, gone from us, would be like taking a part of all of us and throwing it away.
Defendant, please step forward. The court finds that both of these killings were indeed heinous, atrocious, and cruel, in that they were extremely wicked, shockingly evil, vile, and the product of a design to inflict a high degree of pain and utter indifference to human life. This court, independent of, but in agreement with, the advisory sentence rendered by the jury, does hereby impose the death penalty upon the defendant, Theodore Robert Bundy. Take care of yourself, young man.
Thank you.
I say that to you sincerely. Take care of yourself. It's a tragedy for this court to see it's such a total waste, I think, of humanity that I've experienced in this court. You're a bright young man. You made a good lawyer. I'd love to have you practice in front of me. You went another way, partner. Take care of yourself. I don't have any animosity to you. I want you to know that. Court will be in recess until Saturday morning at 10 o'clock. Everybody remain seated until the judge allows the court.
I don't really feel like I have any really cute insights or observations or analyses to add to what's happened this afternoon. I'm tired, sad, and even now I am both fascinated with and angry at myself for falling into that role.
There is yet another case titled The State of Florida versus Theodore Robert Bundy.
This time, Bundy is accused of killing Lake City schoolgirl Kimberly Leach.
The Kim Leach trial was the first murder case that I actually tried as a prosecutor. People criticize us, saying, why are you wasting the county's money prosecuting him when he's already got the death penalty? You get 2 death penalties, you got twice as much chance of one standing up. To make certain that he was executed. The strategy of the trial was very simple. We had tons of evidence. It was an eyewitness that saw Bundy loading Kim Leach into the white van at the junior high school. And in that white van that he was driving was a blood stain. The blood type was the same as Kim's blood type. Numerous fibers from the clothing from Kim Leach's body were found on the van carpet. Fibers from Bundy's blue blazer was found on Kim's clothing. Shoe tracks, there was mountains of evidence against him.
Wearing a blue bow tie and a big grin, Theodore Bundy faced the jury for the last time.
Bundy defended himself, and that did not go over well with the jury. He displayed a tremendous amount of arrogance. One thing that he did was his impromptu wedding ceremony between him and one of his witnesses, Carol Boone.
The defense called only one witness, Carol Boone. Acting as his own lawyer, Bundy questioned her about his character. She said he's a kind, warm, patient man, a very positive part of her life. Then the convicted man popped the question.
Carol, do you want to marry me? Yes. And I want to marry you?
Yes.
And I do want to marry you.
Bundy went on questioning Boone. The prosecution called the marriage proposal a charade and asked the jury to consider the timing of the announcement.
I thought at the time this was simply a ploy. How can you possibly vote the death penalty on my wedding day? And the second thing he did was in the final argument before the jury, he spread his arms out like this and compared himself to Jesus. Well, the jury didn't appreciate it at all. Next morning, we had a verdict. And I was pumped. I had been sweating bullets until the judge called us back into the courtroom.
It is such this court as to count one of the indictment that you, Theodore Robert Bundy, be adjudicated guilty of murder in the first degree, and that you be sentenced to death for the murder of Kimberly Diane Leach. Yes.
Bundy sat with his back to the judge during the reading of the recommendation. Then, one last outburst as the jury was being released.
What is it? Jury, they were wrong. They deny. Can you do it about that? That's right. Go. We're going to go to the holding cell.
I feel that there are some people who, by the enormity of their crime, forfeit the right to live. He was such an evil person who had done so much harm, hurt so many good people. He's just a piece of garbage in the shape of a human being.
When Ted went back to death row, there was no guilt, no remorse.
I feel less guilty now than I felt that day about anything I've been weird. And it's not that I forgot anything or it's closed off part of my mind or compartmentalized. I believe I understand everything I've done.
There's pride in what he did.
I am in the enviable position of not having to deal with guilt, and that's it. Guilt is mechanism used to control people. It's an illusion. It's this kind of social control mechanism, and it's very unhealthy.
Death row is a terrible place, so Ted would get drunk and smoke dope.
There are a lot of guys heavy in the drugs on death row. I smoked a lot of weed, and I have never in my life been so fucked up. I don't like the dope that just gets you mildly giddy. I mean, when I smoke dope, I like to hallucinate a little bit.
Many days he was really, really high. His wife, Carol, would take drugs into Ted vaginally, and then he would take the drugs back to his cell rectally.
I bring some dope down here sometime and just smoke it. And Valiums and alcohol.
Ted and Carol were the French expression folie à deux. They were crazy together. Carol loved him. She told him that she wanted a child. And somehow they had sex in the prison.
We kept looking out the window. There's a black car into a trail light. After the first day, they just basically walked in a couple of times.
And they built this little family on death row. Ted and Carol and little Rosa.
This convicted killer, who fathered a daughter, tried to have a semblance of family life with daughter, stepson, and wife.
The narcissist in him adored the attention.
You want to interest someone, to say, in the screenplay rights, the movie rights, film rights, news articles about me. There are the Rolling Stone stuff, the New York Times stuff, the New York Times Magazine. As a media, it has touched people throughout the country. Because people throughout North America really are, to one degree or another, know about Ted Bundy.
I was interested in putting Ted in my rearview mirror. We'd recorded roughly 100 hours of recorded conversation. But if you listen to the tapes, he never confessed. Last time I talked to Ted, we said we're going to publish a book. He said, I don't care what you say as long as it sells. I was heartily sick of what I was hearing. I was sick of Ted. I walked out of that prison with an enormous sense of relief.
Last time I saw Ted Bundy or talked with him, I was so damn sick of his lies and his denials of what he told us. Sometimes we'd come out of that prison and would be actually sick. I just was tired of Ted Bundy and what he'd taken of my life, really.
The book was about finished, and we felt a responsibility to his mother and stepfather to tell them what Ted had been saying to us and what we were going to publish in the book. So we fly to Seattle, and we have the tape recorder. Louise is sitting next to the tape recorder. I'm sitting next to Louise, and Ted comes on, his voice comes on, and he's talking about murder.
Let's see, he camped behind her, she heard him, she turned around, and he brandished the knife. Say he placed his hands around her throat.
And Louise starts making these little sounds, like a little mouse sounds, little squeaks. And she just listened to it. Then we said, do you have any questions? Neither one of them had any questions whatsoever. So we turned off the tape recorder, and she stood up and she said, "Who's for apple pie and ice cream?" And we had apple pie and ice cream. And then we left.
The nation's worst mass murderers may yet make a contribution to society. They have supplied the raw data to help the FBI build a composite picture of the mass killer and his victims. The Bureau today said a new computer center is being set up to analyze that data. Agents hope that this computer will spot those subtle patterns that they have missed in the past.
Today, the FBI announced the creation of a National Center for Analysis of Violent Crime. The center will use computers like these to look for patterns in the methods of murder. Agents already have interviewed 38 convicted killers, including Charles Manson, to put together profiles on who kills and why.
This is a case we got in today down in North Carolina.
Are we looking at post-mortem or ante-mortem wounds?
It is definitely post-mortem mutilation to the breast area.
At that time, I had the privilege of joining the first class of full-time profilers in that program. We would look at hundreds of cases that are solved or unsolved to try to understand the thought processes of the perpetrators, not only how they developed their skills, but how they evaded detection. We would go in and talk to serial killers, serial child molesters, serial rapists, and Ted Bundy was one of the ones that was chosen.
Ted's case taught law enforcement, specifically the FBI, that their way of going about these investigations was going to have to change because a new type of criminal was emerging, typified by Ted Bundy. He was brand new and absolutely frightening.
We're learning these people are good at what they do. They're very good.
Ted Bundy was unique from most all other serial killers that we were aware of. He had a degree in psychology. He was very bright. He basically set the standard. He's the Jack the Ripper of the United States. He just potentially was a tremendous source of intelligence for us if he would talk to us. The first time I talked to him, he had been on death row for a number of years, but he was still not admitting any of these crimes. He said, basically, who do you think you are to come down here on death row, pull me out of my cell, and ask me stuff? You know, you're the FBI, you guys know everything. You're the geniuses, you write the books, you write the papers. What do you want from me? I said, I want to be better. I want to save lives. I want you to help me. And he just said, they want to kill me. And I said, they want to kill you? He said, the state of Florida wants to kill me. And he said, you'd kill me too, wouldn't you? And I said, I wouldn't take pleasure in it, but if it was my job to pull the switch, yeah, you're toast. And he just started looking at me and laughing and said, how many times do you think I've asked that question to other people? He said, They all lied. They all said they thought I should be a survivor. He said he told the truth. And that was the way we finished our first discussion. They trusted me. In visits after that, I would go in and he would have newspaper clippings of murder cases, some of which I was working, some of which I wasn't even familiar with. And he would say, let's profile this case. And he's very good. I mean, he would say, I think the guy would do this, then he'd do that. I think maybe you guys ought to do this or that. He talked about how a lot of serial killers will return to their crime scene. He also talked about leaving evidence behind that had nothing to do with the crime scene that might throw him off. He confirmed a lot of things that we suspected about serial killers, but he also gave us a lot more things to think about.
The state prison in Florida, America's Sunshine State. This is death row. Prisoners here have been sentenced to die in the electric chair. Some have been here as long as 12 years. They could be executed tomorrow, next week, perhaps never.
I became Ted Bundy's lawyer in 1986 when an associate came in and said, well, there's this guy in Florida and he has his execution scheduled and we need someone to take that case. I was very clear about being opposed to the death penalty, even for the most heinous crimes. Preventing the government from killing people in my name was one of the most important things I could do.
Convicted murderer Ted Bundy is scheduled to die in Florida's electric chair 1 week from today.
Ted was on death watch, so there was no time to waste. Our strongest argument was the fact that he received inadequate representation and that he was represented by himself, who was not competent to either assist or, even worse, in the Chi Omega case, present his own defense. He truly had sabotaged his trials, and we were hoping to find some clear mental illness that we could use as an issue in the case.
Convicted murderer Theodore Bundy is taking new steps to avoid Florida's electric chair.
This is the first time Ted Bundy has left Florida's death row since being sentenced to death. Armed guards brought Bundy to the hearing to determine his mental competency.
My associate Jim Coleman and I were in desperate need of an expert to analyze Ted.
We're talking about incompetence to be his own lawyer or incompetence to stand trial? We're talking about incompetency to stand trial.
That kind of analysis had not happened during the trial because Ted believed he was more than competent.
I knew I wasn't crazy, sane, or incompetent, or anything else. I was consulted by even the suggestion by my attorneys that we should consider the defense. They knew damn well I wasn't crazy.
Dr. Dorothy Lewis, the psychiatrist at Yale, was willing to begin neurological testing on him. She specialized in understanding the brain chemistry of violent men. And then she called me up to say, do you know that your client is manic depressive? That was the first that we'd heard any kind of actual diagnosis of a mental illness with Ted. He talked in terms of a voice in his head, and this voice would start saying things about women. Dr. Lewis realized that this was during the down phase of his manic depression, and Ted controlling his own defense was just a sign of his manic episodes. And he also started talking about that he did not feel empathy. He did not feel love. Dr. Lewis was extremely confident that there was something unique about Ted's brain that had led to this. Some unique brain chemistry or even a tumor in a critical location that blocked his empathy. So we got a stay of execution.
Just 6 hours before his scheduled execution in Stark, Florida, convicted killer Ted Bundy won a 24-hour stay.
The appeals in the case had to go through so many layers of courts. They happened over a period of 3 years.
Serial killer Theodore Bundy has escaped the chair once again.
Lawyers for Bundy went to court in a last-ditch effort to argue that he wasn't competent to stand trial in 1980.
But the public pressure and the political pressure was unsurmountable.
Eleanor Rose of Seattle believes Bundy killed her daughter Denise.
As far as Bundy goes,
I hate him, and I do want him to get the electric chair.
No court was going to be the one to stand in the way of Ted Bundy's execution.
Bundy's lawyers were trying for a stay of execution in U.S. District Court today, but were turned down this afternoon. This after the Florida Supreme Court rejected his appeal Friday.
We had 2 stays of execution, and in the last case, the Supreme Court denied the stay.
Shortly after the High Court's decision was announced, Florida Governor Bob Martinez signed a new death warrant.
He represents why you have capital punishment.
For 10 years, Ted Bundy has been fighting execution in Florida's electric chair.
Bundy is scheduled to die in the Florida electric chair on Tuesday.
On the last few days before the execution, he decided to confess.
Well, I'm at the point finally where I see that I'm going to have to tell you and others everything I know with regard to so-called unsolved cases.
Ted always thought that his knowledge of these crimes was his ace in the hole. That by offering to confess, the governor would delay his execution a few years.
I'm the only one in possession of this information. That's just the way it is. To do a proper job for everybody. And I'm going to need some time.
Jim and I thought it was extremely foolhardy for him to publicly confess. I didn't think the governor would buy it. I didn't think it would stop his execution.
His attorney had called me in Seattle to please go down, talk to Ted. He wanted to confess.
I was told that he wanted to talk, so I went down. His purpose in doing this, obviously, was to extend his life. Although I was not trying to extend his life, my job was to kind of encourage him to talk and remind him of things that might be applicable to the cases.
I'm here at Florida State Prison, Rayford, Florida, with Mr. Ted Bundy. We're having a meeting, and presently it's 2 days prior to his scheduled execution date. You've been involved in how many homicides?
Oh, we came up with 30. I mean, we added that. It's late at night, like you said, but I think that's a fairly close figure.
Would you just try to summarize what states they were in and what periods of time?
I just really will summarize it. California, Oregon, Washington, Idaho, Utah, Colorado, Florida between 1973 and 1978.
Of the 30 that you were involved in, can you have an idea of how many were actually buried?
Well, that's a good question. Gee, 10.
10 burials of the 30 by 30%?
Roughly, I mean, I'm just... Yes.
Okay. In a couple of the cases, and I'm not sure how many, but you opted to sever the heads from the victims. And how many were there, do you recall, of the 30?
Perhaps half a dozen.
Well, I was there 2 days. The first day, he's behind a heavy glass, and then there's a kind of a mouth hole you can talk through. And that's when he told me everything.
Can you hear that? Okay. I just said that the Hawkins girl's head was severed and taken up the road 25 to 50 yards and buried at a location about 10 yards west of the road on a rocky hillside. Did you hear that?
When he said he was clearing his soul at the end, he wanted me to know that he practiced necrophilia. That was something he never talked about even in the third person before that. The truth is terrible. It's terrible.
We woke up in the morning and there all the newspapers are, Ted reveals his secrets. At that point, I was really overcome with emotion. It was over, or we knew it was over.
After 11 years of silence, he has begun admitting to over 30 killings in 5 western states he has always been suspected of.
The confessions came as a surprise to Bundy's mother.
If he killed all those lovely young women, we have several beautiful daughters of our own. We know how we would feel. That's a terrible thing. And he wasn't raised that way.
This evening, the Florida governor says he's fully confident Bundy will be executed tomorrow morning. In the words of one other state official, this master manipulator will not be allowed to make a mockery of the judicial system.
I was with him when he had gotten a call. It was his attorney saying that there were no more appeals. He knew he was going to die.
One of this country's most notorious killers will be executed tomorrow morning at the Florida State Penitentiary.
Ted Bundy has always received a lot of public attention. The day before his scheduled execution was no different. Television crews are here from across the country.
The day before the execution of Ted Bundy, we had satellite trucks set up all over the field. I think that was one of the first big uses of satellite trucks to cover an event like that.
There were thousands of people outside. You could hear them inside, even in the inner confines of the prison. Burn, Bundy, burn. Burn, Bundy, burn. And they were setting fireworks off. I looked at Ted, and I said, you hear that out there? And he goes, they're crazy. He said, they think I'm crazy. Listen to all of them.
Really, it's a desire of society to take an eye for an eye. And I guess there's no cure for that. That's society's problem. Maybe we should find a cure for society's problem.
Just down the road from the prison, there are even Ted Bundy t-shirts for sale. This one says, "Burn, Bundy, burn."
Yeah, throw one in, huh? I'll give them to the girls.
That was in the crowd outside the prison. It was almost like a carnival.
Ainsworth, have you been in this morning?
No, I have not seen Ted for a long time. We wrote a very unfavorable book about him, and he does not care much for us.
I was so happy to see him go.
He's entertaining, he's got a good sense of humor, but he's also very devious, he's a mean son of a gun. The man's a wimp. I mean, people that sneak up on women and kill them, and what else can you say?
At some point that day, Ted tells me that he's not going to sit in a chair. And I said, well, what are you going to do? He said, I'm going to die right here. And he was sitting across from me, and he had a pen, and he said, I can stick this so far up my artery, it'll squirt in your face, and I'll be drained before anybody even gets here. And I said, is that what you want to do? And he says, I'm not going to let them kill me. And we had just had some other discussions, religious discussions, throughout our visits over the years. But that particular day, he had the Bible with him, and he was reading scripture. And I said, how many numbers did we talk about earlier? And he said, 30-something. I said, and now you're going to go to 31? Don't you think taking a life, even if it's your own, is a method of homicide, even though they call it suicide? If you think there's a deity upstairs that's going to judge you, you think you're in a position to push the envelope that far? And he just looked at me and said, you got me again. And so then he prayed some, and I prayed with him.
All right, can you all hear? Ted Bundy is being served for supper tonight a meal of burrito, rice, and salad. At 5 o'clock tomorrow morning, he'll be offered the last meal of traditional steak and eggs.
Then we rehearsed his execution on a chair in the office. I said, well, they're going to shave your head. They're going to shave your right calf. I said, you're going to sit down in the chair. I said, they're going to put shackles on your feet. You're going to feel jolts.
This evening, there is a one-on-one interview with Dr. James Dobson, which you're aware of.
Bundy told a California religious broadcaster that a sexual frenzy drove him to kill women across the country.
There was a great deal of remorse. He wept several times while talking to me.
I've lived in prison for a long time now. And I've met a lot of men who were motivated to commit violence just like me. And without exception, every one of them was deeply involved in pornography, without question, without exception, deeply influenced and consumed by an addiction to pornography.
I was stunned when he blamed it on pornography, because we all grow up having access to pornography, and it doesn't turn us all into serial killers. I guess he was trying to blame it on somebody else. You know, blame it on the devil, pornography.
I think that's typical Ted. He's playing it for all it's worth. He's playing a game. He's buying time.
In truth, when I talked to him about the pornography, he said it. I never said it made me do it, but I did as best I could to try to get them to help me. He said, you know, it didn't make me do it. I did it because I wanted to do it.
Good morning. In just about 10 minutes, serial killer Ted Bundy is scheduled to be executed here at Florida's state prison.
The prison fired up the generators which power the electric chair. Neither the Supreme Court or governor's office has granted a stay.
I was in New York. I got up early to watch it on TV.
Floodlights bathe the prison at dawn. Note the activity visible in the window at the bottom right of your screen as the death chamber is being prepared.
I was interested that there were a lot of drunken college kids there, young men who were age 10 or so when Ted had killed those girls at Cuyahoga. It was an excuse to get drunk and whoop it up. There was a lot of that going on.
We got burned. Bundy is over that.
Whole start. Just three-legged chair, just like the original. $5.
All of the witnesses, the official witnesses, we got there early in the morning, loaded us up in buses, and then drove us over to the death chamber. We walked into the viewing part of the death chamber, and the door swung open. In came two burly guards with Bundy between them, and he was white as a sheet. They brought him around to the electric chair, and they strapped him down, and he was allowed to say some final words. He says something about sorry he caused so much trouble. Then they lower the skull cap with the black hood over his head. The guy on the phone gives the high sign, and they throw the switch. And as the electricity coursed through his body, you can see his fist tighten with the thumb between the two fingers. And I remember thinking at that time, I wonder how many throats that fist is tightened around. When the electricity was turned off, a doctor unbuttoned the front of his shirt, put a stethoscope to his chest, and finally stepped back and pronounced Bundy dead. And then, I think it was the warden, someone announced that the death penalty had been carried out. I'm ashamed to admit that I was elated. I hope I'm never that happy over the death of another human being ever again.
As witnesses walked out of the prison to signal Bundy's death, the crowd outside cheered.
Then the hearse picked him up and drove down, and hundreds and hundreds of people ran after the hearse. purse.
For the man who murdered dozens of women, the irony of the final act of justice is that it may have been carried out by a female executioner, hidden from Bundy and others by a black hood.
He decided that he would be cremated, and he wanted his remains spread over the Cascade Mountains, where he said he had some of the best times of his life. But of course, that's also where the remains of some of his victims were found, and some probably still remain there.
Did anyone know the real Ted? Was he just an evil genius, as the Ted Bundy myth eventually became? Or was there something wrong? Was he not in complete control?
He could have done something good with his life, but he didn't. He chose to go his way.
There's never been anybody I've seen that remotely approaches what he was like. There were just too many things wrong, too many wires crossed. He was born with the safety off.
And how did I feel about Ted? I don't think I really handled it. You know, he's gone. I don't deal with it. I sort of closed that chapter a long time ago in my life.
I was very lucky. I got away from one of the world's most infamous serial killers. I sit and think about the victims and their families. He did not deserve to live.
He's in a place where I hope that he's basically just burning in hell.
Ted endures in the hearts and minds of those who knew him like a bad cold. He just keeps coming back. So there's a kind of a taint that I can't get rid of.
It was horrendous. Sometimes you wake up at night and think about it.
We want to be able to say we can identify these dangerous people. The really scary thing is you can't identify them. People don't realize that there are potential killers among them.
How could anyone live in a society where people they liked, loved, lived with, worked with, and admired could the next day turn out to be the most demonic people imaginable?
And on the details screen for conversations with the killer, the dead, episodes and more. 3 of 7 buttons. In main menu, home button 1 of 8. In home, NBC News button 70 of 108 in a grid. In home, NBC News button 70 of 108. DOGTV, Stir. Comedy. Blue. Plex. A. Smarters Player. The Lego. The Pet Collective button 105 of 108. In the Pet Collective dialogue. In the Pet Collective loading video, please wait.
They have Pet Collective on Pluto TV, so it's videos that people make with pets like cats, dogs, what a cute doggy, a Labrador Retriever. There's a golden retriever in the yard, jumping up to get things. Oh, dog's trying to climb a tree to get a squirrel. Now I'm gonna go to YouTube. Let's see. See if the stream went live.
Film. YouTube. Launching YouTube.
A tremendous relief to know that we did. A tremendous relief to know that we did.
Okay, I'm gonna end this stream now. It's my iPad battery is low, 39%. For more documentaries, movies, TV shows, hit the big red button and subscribe. Peace out, YouTube. I'm going to click on Finish Event. Let's see.